Welcome. You're listening to Latin Waves with your hosts Sylvia and Stuart Richardson. Latin Waves is more than just hot rhythms. This is a show about community, about creating a culture that is inclusive and based on fairness. Because everyone deserves dignity, respect, and has something to contribute. A new world is possible, and it all starts with us. Journalist Arnold August. He is the writer and author of Democracy in Cuba in the 1987 to 1998 elections, Cuba and its neighbors, Democracy in Motion, Cuba versus U.S. relations, Change and Beyond. I'm so delighted to have you on our program. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure for me to be with you once again, Sylvia.
Now, the world has seen many changes since the world of, Fidel Castro, where we saw a small nation demonstrate to the world that people committed to its own democracy could not only face the aggression of an imperial power like the U.S., but could also set an example for the world. What were some of the lessons we learned from Cuba? And I want to context this with the experience we're having with Venezuela today.
Okay, first of all, with regards to Cuba, not everyone appreciates it, but the main feature that we can learn from Cuba is here in a country such as Canada, that we have to deal with the capitalist system, not get caught up for example, with regards to different political parties or personalities. Like, it's interesting to note in a statement issued by the Cuban Friendship Association a few months ago, they mentioned that the most important thing for people outside of Cuba, learning from Cuba, is to deal with the question of the system. And in countries such as Canada, and even more so in the United States, people who are even friends of Cuba, they seem to have forgotten this lesson, that the issue is not, for example, Trump or Biden or Sanders and all that. It's the system that has to be dealt with. And the problem with dealing with individual political parties or personalities, whether it's in Canada or the United States or other capitalist countries, it's not just a diversion, it sort of sucks up the energy from the growing revolutionary movement against imperialism and capitalism. So rather than people working out their own plans based on their own initiatives against the entire system and organizing in that context, the tendency, unfortunately, is to get cut up into the conversation or into the debate of which is the lesser of two evils, etc. I think this is the main feature that I see from Cuba that we could learn from today. And Venezuela it's a different case. Venezuela is it's much this revolution is much younger than the Cuban one, but I think that, in my view, I have a very definite positive experience with Venezuela, which I'd like to share with you and your list. Caracas in July 2019. Only several months earlier, in January 2019, according to the United States, the Lima Group, members such as Canada and Colombia, they all said that it's a question of time. They're going to overthrow the Maduro government. They were saying that in January 2019. And as I mentioned, in July 2019, who would have thought that the very city, Caracas, that was supposed to be in the hands of the United States and its allies, was supposed to have Chavismo and the spirit of the Bolivarian Revolution, after the start of that slow motion coup against Maduro, that Caracas became the center of the world anti-imperialist socialist revolution. And what I think, if I may go on, just to mention that I've been thinking about this over the last few months, especially since we've been having very close ties more than ever with the Bolivarian Revolution through its Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jorge Ariasa. And my view is that 1 year later, Venezuela, or the Bolivarian Revolution, is still the epicenter of the world socialist anti-imperialist movement. Why do I say that? Because, for example, when Arias spoke to us just a few days ago in the Zoom conference with them, he mentioned how important it is for us in Canada to fight our own struggles against the system. In other words, Venezuela sees us in Canada as fighting on the same wavelength, if you like, them against their system, against imperialism, and in Canada, ourselves as well against the system, and in this case, Canadian imperialism. Venezuela is unique in that sense. For them, solidarity is different than what we normally see. It's sort of I don't want to be too depreciating, but a sort of a Mother Teresa solidarity, in the sense that we're in solidarity with another country. But with Venezuela, I think it's quite different. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I see it this way. With Venezuela, it's a mutual collaboration, exchange between, on the one hand, here in Canada, revolutionaries, people who have a left tendency on the one hand, and with the Bolivarian Revolution on the other hand. There is a mutual exchange on the same footing between two different countries and two different peoples.
You're right to point out that our struggle is not against one particular government, whether it's a liberal party or a conservative party, whether it's Trump versus Biden, but rather the system and the systemic violence that is inherent within that system. The capitalist system has been supported and maintained by classes, policies, by racist practices that lead to police brutality, as we see it exemplified by the Black Lives Matter movement, by the I Don't Know More movement here in Canada, by the many struggles of people fighting against imperialism and also colonization within our own countries. So can we talk a little bit about the modes of violence, though, that continuously distract us from this idea that what needs changing is the system?
I think that one thing that we could deal with together, Sylvia, because it's in the news today, is the question of Canada and Venezuela. I'd like to, completely deconstruct the Canadian or Trudeau myth that Canada is a peaceful country and they're looking for a peaceful solution in Venezuela. This is completely false, and this is where, if people fall into this trap, it's because of this issue, as we mentioned before, getting caught up in different personalities and different political parties. Perhaps the Liberals are better than Conservatives and all that. But the fact is, Sylvia, that Canada is at war. They say they're peaceful, and they have only peaceful intentions for Venezuela. But in fact, there is a war being carried out by the United States and its allies, such as Canada, against Venezuela. I see a war. It's a multi-hybrid war. First of all, it's an economic war with crippling sanctions, and Canada has its own set of sanctions against Venezuela. Secondly, it's a political war. All over the world, everyone is trying to convert different countries, different governments against the Maduro government. Thirdly, I would say there's a media war going on in Canada. The Canadian media, almost 100% of the mainstream media, has been carrying out a non-stop disinformation campaign against Maduro, demonizing him as if he's the devil, the evil in the world of today. And there's also the diplomatic war, whereby Canada refuses to recognize the legitimate government of Maduro and has latched on to this completely irrelevant clown Guaido and named him as the legitimate government of Venezuela. So you have this hybrid war going on against Venezuela over the last few years. Now, in that context, we also have the danger coming up once again of actual military intervention. So I'm talking about military intervention against Venezuela. There was an attempt last May 2019, May 3rd and 4th, 2019. I don't know if you recall what they call Operation Gideon, where you had a handful of mercenaries led by former American Marines Green Beret and a private mercenary group based in Florida with a couple of dozen individuals who had deserted the Venezuelan army, an actual attempt of a military invasion through the high seas. It didn't work. It failed because the Venezuelan people, the people on the ground, caught them red-handed, and those who were captured, including 2 American Marines, they admitted, and we have that on tape, that this was actually organized, carried on with the collaboration directly of Trump. Now, what is of interest to us here is that this actually took place. Now, did Trudeau, who's supposed to be in favor of a peaceful solution in Venezuela, did he see anything against that brazen attempt of a military invasion by the United States through its allies in Colombia? He did not say anything against it. However, in my view, what he said the next day after that, rather than saying, well, we oppose this military intervention, we're in favor of a peaceful solution, instead, his foreign minister, Francois-Philippe Champagne, issued a tweet saying he just had a conversation. This is the day after the attempted invasion. I just had a pleasant conversation with my colleagues from Colombia and Brazil, and we discussed the issue of the crisis in Venezuela. Now, I asked you, Sylvia, by saying that the day after the coup, isn't that an indirect way of saying that they supported that intervention, that military intervention? Only a couple of days later, he had a similar statement saying how they were working very closely together with Guaido and his allies there to bring a solution to the crisis in Venezuela. So I think it's important that the media knows that Canada, far from being in favor of a peaceful solution, that Canada actually, in an indirect manner, supports these military invasions. And there's another one that is being worked out right now as we speak, Sylvia. And that is, it was indicated a few days ago that the head of the Southern Command of American Armed Forces said that they're planning a surprise in October against Venezuela. What is that surprise in October? Just before the November 4th U.S. presidential elections. Surely to try to deviate people in the United States from the negative impact of policy and his reputation, to try to show how strong he is on the international front by trying to get rid of Maduro. Now, this is taking place, actually discussing it as a possibility of an invasion taking place in October, what they call an October surprise. And I think it's not an accident that just a few days ago, Trump said that the problem with the Democrats is that if the Democrats take over, it would just be Venezuela all over again in the United States. Of course, he knows that's not true. I think he started trying to set the stage to have Venezuela as an excuse to organize another military invasion against Venezuela. Now, this is known publicly. I've written about it, and my articles have been tweeted to Trudeau, to Champagne, and other leaders. They know about it, but they are not saying anything about it. And even the Canadian media, and them also are aware of this plot that is being organized, but they are silent about the whole thing. For what reason? So I think that just to maintain the false notion that Trudeau is a good guy, that is in favor of a peaceful solution to Venezuela. Well, if Canada is really in favor of a peaceful solution in Venezuela, they should have openly denounced the May 3rd, May 4th maritime invasion into Venezuela. And also right now, when it's been openly said as a policy of the American government for an October surprise against Venezuela, to take a stand now against the military invasion against Venezuela. And I think that members of parliament, for example, the NDP or others, even though parliament may not be in session, I think that the members of parliament have to speak out now against what's been going on now, a U.S.-led, another attempted military interference invasion of Venezuela, as well as the mainstream media. How can the mainstream media be silent such an issue of a military intervention in Venezuela, which not only would bring harm and bloodshed to Venezuela, but the whole region south of the Rio Grande, this risk to go up in flames and chaos because of American intervention in a similar way as happened, for example, in Southeast Asia, when the United States carried out its war against Vietnam. And I think that, people on the left who may be wishy-washy about Venezuela, whether left, right, or center, Venezuela has an elected, legitimate government. And secondly, the United States and Canada have no right to interfere in the internal affairs of this sovereign country. And most importantly at all, have no right to organize any kind of military intervention, military provocation against Venezuela. So if you don't mind, I'll be using Latin Waves here today to issue a challenge to members of parliament in Canada, mainstream media, to people on the left or center or whatever, to find out what's happening, take a stand against military intervention in Venezuela that is being supported in a very indirect, hypocritical way by the Trudeau government.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about the significance also that this invasion, this military invasion, came from Colombia, a country that Canada has in recent years become very closely allied.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the context, because as far as Latin Americans are concerned, Colombia is one of the most dangerous countries in the world and one of the deadliest for labor activists.
I'm glad that you raised it, Sylvia, because it brings out another aspect of this whole puzzle. Like, what is Canada doing? In this whole plot against Venezuela, aside from Trump, the main actors are Canada and Colombia. Now, the Americans are saying very clearly that they are not going to send American troops into Venezuela. They'll be counting on Colombian troops. Now, it's very interesting that on the one hand, even though Justin Trudeau has a phone number of the foreign minister of Venezuela, Jorge Arias, that he could call anytime to try to work out relationship, friendly relations, normal relations with Venezuela. Rather than that, how many times has Trudeau called Ivan Duque, the president of Colombia, to congratulate each other on the great the work that they're doing with regards to COVID-19, supposedly, or with regards to human rights and all that? Well, as you say, Colombia, and it's known for a long time, Colombia is the worst country in terms of violation of human rights. Just in 2020, which just began, just in 2020, there's been 33 massacres and 97 assassinations this year. Most of them are social and political leaders, and we have to hold responsible for this. Who? It's the Ivan Duque government in Bogota. And in 2016, since the peace agreements were reached between Colombia and the armed forces there, with the help of Cuba and Havana, there have been 971, I repeat, 971 social leaders who have been assassinated in Venezuela since that time in 2016. So what right does Colombia have to talk about violation of human rights in Venezuela? And what right does Canada have? Surely he does not have a mandate from us Canadians to forge such close relations with a country whose hands are spilled in the blood of the Colombian people. I mean, they keep up making one pretext after the other. One of the pretexts for the most current attempt to invade in the next couple of months is the so-called issue of COVID-19. They say that COVID-19 is very rampant in Venezuela, and it's affecting other countries. People are leaving Venezuela. This is a blatant lie. Venezuela is the only country in the world where people who have left in the last few months because of COVID-19, countries such as Colombia, but have decided to come back because the situation in other countries such as Colombia is so bad that they're far better off in Venezuela. And the actual COVID situation is far superior in Venezuela compared to other countries such as Colombia. They're so-called concerned, like Trudeau, the liberal poster boy, Trudeau, so concerned about COVID-19 and other countries and all that. Venezuela is one of the best countries in the world dealing with COVID-19. Now, it's interesting to note that's one pretext, but there's also another pretext. And the other pretext is supposedly Venezuela is getting arms from Iran, from Belarus, and other countries, from Russia, being imported from these countries into Venezuela. This is also being said without any foundations. In fact, I saw an interview with Nicolas Maduro on television yesterday. He has a very good sense of humor, by the way. But when he heard about it, that Venezuela is supposedly importing missiles from Iran, he said, "Oh, hey, that's a good idea. Okay, thank you very much. We'll look into it. If we have money, we may buy some missiles from Iran to defend ourselves." But how come there are two different pretexts? One, COVID-19, and the other is supposedly arms within Venezuela or narco trafficking within Venezuela. How can you have two different pretexts? Because both pretexts are false pretexts. The United States and Colombia, with the aid and abetting of Trudeau, are seeking pretexts for a possible military intervention with Colombian troops and mercenaries into Venezuela. And we have to put a stop. We have to do everything we can to get people in Canada to stand up against this intervention now. Canada already has a very poor image internationally. It is for this reason that Trudeau suffered a humiliating defeat. So I've been reading all of the tweets and printouts and statements by the Canadian government since the June elections to the United Nations Security Council. Believe it or not, they're so arrogant. They keep on talking about Canada's role in the world, how Canada's going to do this. They completely disregard the fact that the international community has rejected Canada's foreign policy because of Venezuela, because of Palestine, and many other issues. And what you said, the extraction of mining minerals, for example, in countries such as Africa, but they just pretend that vote didn't take place. It also is important that one of the reasons that Canada lost, I am convinced, because we, Canadian Foreign Policy Institute and other allies that work with us and still work with us now, we led a very important campaign in Canada, as well as internationally, against Canada's bid for a seat on the United Nations. But they lost. It was a humiliation. But they are so arrogant. They just keep on carrying on as if they never lost that vote, as if they have a mandate to be a leader on the world stage. And I think that the media should speak out. Hey, Trudeau, how come you're not dealing with the fact that you lost the United Nations Security Council vote, but you are pretending that you did not lose it? You're even going farther along the path of intervention, for example, on the issue of Venezuela, and also supporting Israel against Palestine. And I wanted to mention, you mentioned the issue of extraction, of extractivism. That is really important. It's also important in Canada. The same goal that Trudeau has of driving a foreign policy to get a hold of the resources, as Arietta said very clearly last week when he spoke to people across Canada, is to get Venezuela's natural resources. And within Canada, what is the situation? It's the same thing. The imperialism, external imperialism, is matched by its domestic colonialism, whereas the Canadian government is a colonial government, white supremacist colonial government going back several centuries, which is based on the genocide of the indigenous people in Canada in order to get their lands, and now more recently to extract the natural resources that are in the land of the indigenous peoples of Canada. So we're really dealing with two types of a fight on the question of extractivism on two different fronts. One is colonialism in Canada and imperialism abroad. And I think we have to get to the heart of the issue. We have a lot of strong allies amongst the indigenous nations, and I would like to use the opportunity greetings to Indigenous brothers and sisters all over the countries who are doing a great job. If we recall, before COVID-19, actually, we together, Indigenous and other people, we shut down Canada. That was great. We shut down Canada in support of the land rights of the Indigenous nations. If it wasn't for COVID-19, who knows what would have happened? But that is part of our history, and we have to maintain, in my view, that very strong position. We support the Indigenous nations and their right to their land. And if we have to, we will shut down Canada once again. So there's no way that we could forget about what has happened in Canada with regard to the Indigenous nations over the last 450 years. I don't know if you saw that documentary that was done, an excellent documentary on the so-called Oka crisis on the 30th anniversary. It was aired on TV a couple of months ago, and I watched it about 3-4 times. So again, I was so impressed. And what I remember, I will never forget, spontaneous from the grassroots. One of the Indigenous people was interviewed by the documentary filmmaker, and what he said is very, very important. He says, "You speaking about the Canadian government, you lied to us about this. You lied to us about everything except one thing. The only promise you kept was that you are going to take our land, and that's what you have done." And he said that is what we are fighting against. I think it's a question of principle, and we, in the same way, we have to support Venezuela against U.S. imperialism. We have to support the Indigenous nations against Canadian colonialism.
Thank you again for being with us.
It's a pleasure.
We've come to the end of our show, Latin Waves. Latin Waves is an internationally syndicated weekly program made available through campus and community stations and available out to the world at www.latinwavesmedia.com. Visit Latin Waves Media to hear previous shows, to access resources, or support our efforts towards social change via community project engagement. Thank you and bye for now.